So welcome to everyone who's joining us today and those who are going to watch this in the future. We're so glad to have you with us. This is a webinar titled Doing Academia Differently in Conversation with Neuroatypicality. This webinar series follows from the previous 14 webinars in a series called Post-Philosophies and the Doing of Inquiry, hosted by a collaboration between Geert Vandekerckhove from Ghent University, Viv Bozalek from the University of the Western Cape, and myself, Candice Kuby from the University of Missouri. Nikki Romano, who you also see here on the screen, is our support person, the artist, the person who makes these recordings possible on YouTube, and pretty much doing everything behind the scenes to support the series. So thank you, Nikki, for your work as part of our series. I am home today in a snow and ice storm, so you might hear my dog and my child in the background today. I'll do my best to keep muted when it gets noisy. So this free webinar series has a total of 10 sessions. We meet monthly on the topic of doing academia differently through conversations with neuroatypicality. Each session involves one or two international guests who have had some experience with neuroatypicality in the context of higher education. This series is made possible by a research collaborative partnership between the University of Missouri System, the University of Ghent, and the University of the Western Cape. This partnership between the University of Missouri System and the University of Western Cape started in 1986. And the partnership between the University of Ghent and University of Western Cape has had a partnership for more than 20 years. Thus, the three universities have come together in a tri-continental partnership. And this agreement was set to promote a partnership between our institutions during a time of travel restrictions due to the global pandemic. The funds were provided to support virtual research and teaching collaborations between faculty members at our three institutions. And we are very grateful that our universities have had long-time collaborations and are supporting this current webinar series. These webinars are also available on YouTube, so you can go to the website for the webinar series and find a way to access them. You can also subscribe to the series on YouTube to get updates. On YouTube, you can select the option for closed captioning to see a written transcript of the webinar. And please, as always, double check the webinar website for exact times and the most up-to-date Zoom link in order to join the next webinar. So today, our panelist, one looks very familiar, has been a part of this series all along. So I'm going to ask if Geert will mute and just do a brief introduction, name, kind of institution, and also maybe introduce Amber shortly. And then later on in the introductions here, Viv will give more thorough introductions and Nikki will give a more thorough introduction of you, Geert. So Geert, maybe say a hello and welcome for Amber here as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Candace. I'm a stand-in this afternoon. As you have been noticing, I'm not Lieve Carret, who was the main guest we expected this afternoon. Lieve is sick, she's ill and can't be with us this afternoon. So we decided that I would take over this afternoon. I'm working at Ghent University, just as Lieve is doing in the Department of Special Needs Education and in the research group of disability studies. And while preparing my little intervention of this afternoon, I was looking for a companion, and one of the most creative, intelligent companions I met in the last months was Amber Vandekerckhove, who is somebody who is already holding a master's degree in moral sciences. And in a second attempt, she is going for a master level of gender and diversity. And Amber and I, we met in the course of disability studies, where she was together with about 20 students. And at the end, all students did a presentation. And I was really astonished by the way Amber was presenting a story, her story, a story of students in a university, in an institution of higher education. And I invited Amber to be with us this afternoon and to help us out by starting with her story after the round of introductions. And I think it's good to start from real life experiences and to go from real life experiences to some critical insights afterwards. So thank you for having us this afternoon.
Thanks for that introduction and just a little bit of a backstory and context to the shift in panelists today, as well as your relationship and why you chose Amber to join us. So looking forward to hearing that story. Viv, do you want to continue with our introductions?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Nikki Romano, who is a PhD student at the University of the Western Cape, doing a joint degree at Utrecht University, hopefully soon to graduate, and a lecturer in art history at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Nikki is an artist and also an art educator, and she's had experience in teaching right across the board in various sectors, both higher education and with children. Nikki has been providing the technical support, and she will be doing it this afternoon. And she's also going to be assisting and moderating the questions for us this afternoon. So thanks, Nikki, and welcome to you. Still muted, Nikki.
It happens every time. Thanks, Viv. It's my job to introduce the three co-hosts today. And Candace Kuby is the Professor of Learning, Teaching and Curriculum at the University of Missouri, where she is Department Chair and the Director of Qualitative Inquiry. Candace's research interests include the coming to be of literacies when young children work with autistic and digital tools, approaches to pedagogies of qualitative inquiry when thinking with post-structuralism and post-human philosophies. She's the co-author of several books, including Speculative Pedagogies of Qualitative Inquiry, Post-Humanism and Literacy Education, Knowing, Becoming, Doing Literacies, and Disrupting Qualitative Inquiry, Possibilities and Tensions in Educational Research. The scholarship appears in journals including Qualitative Inquiry, the International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education, the Journal of Early Childhood Literacy, the Journal of Literacy Research, and Critical Studies, Critical Methodologies. Geert van Hove is Professor in Disability Studies at Ghent University. His field of research is disability studies and inclusive education. Professor van Hove was the Disability Studies Professor of the Endowed Chair of Disability Studies at VUMC Amsterdam in the Department of Medical Humanities from 2013 to 2018. In 2017, he was the recipient of the Stephen Taylor Memorial Senior Scholar Award at the Disability Studies in Education Conference in Minneapolis. Vivienne Bozalek is an Emerita Professor in Women and Gender Studies at the University of the Western Cape and Honorary Professor in the Center for Higher Education Research, Teaching and Learning at Rhodes University. She holds a PhD from Utrecht University, and her research interests and publications include the political ethics of care and social justice, post-humanism and feminist new materialisms, innovative scholarly practices in higher education, and post-qualitative and participatory methodologies. Her most recent co-edited books include Post-Human and Political Care Ethics for Reconfiguring Higher Education, Post-Anthropocentric Social Work, Critical Post-Humanism and New Materialist Perspectives, and Higher Education Hauntologies, Living with Ghosts for a Justice to Come. Thanks. Candice?
Thanks for those introductions. So as you might have noticed, we are on the Zoom webinar platform instead of the meeting platform. So at this time, the hosts and the panelists have access to video and audio. When we move into the question and answer portion of the webinar today, we will give those in attendance an option if they want to engage with the audio and video to be able to change to that and join the panelist for questions and answers. We will also have opportunities for those who don't want to have video or audio access to also type their questions for us to voice and ask our panelists. As we mentioned before, the recording of this webinar will be available for public viewing later on YouTube. If you've just joined us recently, we do have the chat function open and some people have already said hello to each other. So feel free to go ahead and say hi and connect with those in attendance during the webinar. We ask that you find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. This will make it easier for myself and Nikki to moderate the questions later on. That way we're not scrolling through the chat box to find your questions. And you're welcome to enter those questions at any time while the panelists are talking, and we'll be sure to voice them during the Q&A time. So the structure of the webinar is as follows. Amber and Geert will talk for the first 30 or 40 minutes, and Viv will ask them some questions pertaining to the questions that are threaded as our common thread for all the webinars in this series. You can find these questions on our webpage. In their presentations, Amber and Geert will share some examples from their scholarship and experiences, as well as the suggested reading that's posted on our website. Finally, we'll open up space for all those that are joining us today who may want to be in conversation to ask questions. And I think Amber might have to leave a little bit early, but we hope that you're able to stay with us as long as possible. And we hope to have at least about 30 minutes for a Q&A time with all those that are with us today. So Viv's going to get us started with a little more thorough introduction of our guest and then jumping into conversation.
Thanks very much, Candice. I just wanted to say thank you so much, both to Geert and to Amber, for jumping in like this and for being prepared to do this session. I couldn't actually think of anyone more apt than Geert to do this session. And I've been, he makes such interesting comments during the series. And it's so nice to be able to have more of those comments and to be able to give you and Amber the floor. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I'm not going to introduce you any further, but if you would like to say anything more about Amber, I'm going to give you and Amber the floor now, and then follow up with questions afterwards.
So we promised the attendees a personal story to start with, the story of Amber, and in the next part, I will try to link certain elements from that story to theoretical or background elements. And I asked or I suggested colleagues who are attending this meeting to read a book of Timothy Dolmach. And I was doing this because Amber was using that book in her preparation of her personal story in the course of disability studies. So I really wanted her to feel a little bit at home by bringing in that book. So perhaps she will refer to it, or we can jump to it together afterwards. But first, I think it's good to listen to Amber.
So first of all, thank you so much for giving me the space to share my story. When I was about 14 years old, I was diagnosed with dysorthography, which is a writing disorder. Since I was 14, I have taken multiple tests for dyslexia, but I was never diagnosed with dyslexia because even as a child, I read rather fast and comprehensive. For me, reading books is a part of my identity. But my writing problems are pretty much the same as the people that have old school dyslexia. When I came to the University of Ghent, that was in 2016, I immediately wanted to register my disability because in high school, a lot of teachers told me that my writing needed to be improved if I wanted to succeed further in school. Mostly my language teachers didn't expect much from me. So the idea of writing on an academic level was very stressful for me, especially papers, essay questions, and the idea of a master thesis. So I needed the professors to know that my writing did not reflect my capabilities and that I was smarter than my writing suggested, and that I was at my place at the university. Unfortunately for me, the University of Ghent doesn't believe in dysorthography as being something distinct from dyslexia. According to them, I belong under the umbrella term of dyslexia, and therefore I only get access to the facilities that are linked to dyslexia. but those facilities aren't tailored to my needs. I don't need them. They're not based on my personal experiences. And during those conversations with the facility administration, it is very clear to me that I don't have the power to define myself. The university in 2016 also asked me to yet again take a couple of tests just to make sure if I really needed the extras. I can assure you that having a writing problem and to take thousands of tests just to make sure is very frustrating. And the only facility that I used during my years of studying is that my professors just know that I have a writing disorder. They just know, and some just don't believe in them. I did my first bachelor and my first master. I did my bachelor and my first master in moral science. That is a domain that resembles the empirical ethics. So I had mostly courses in philosophy and social sciences. So there was a lot of writing involved, which caused a lot of stress. But I was at a point that I could carry a lot. I had a good study method and I had nice people around me, fellow students that always offered their support and help, like checking my papers for spelling errors. And my bachelor went by very, very smoothly. But then came the master thesis, and I had to write something between 30,000 and 45,000 words, which is like 100 pages, I would say. And a general problem in our faculty is that the institution gives us a very big and stressful task, but doesn't give us nearly enough support to fulfill that task. The people that are available as guiders have a lot of other work to do as well. And they don't have the room to give us the guidance that we need and that we deserve. This was especially clear during my master year. That was during the first year of the pandemic, and students couldn't support each other like we normally do. We were kept apart in Belgium, that is. We were kept apart and we became more distant from each other. So COVID-19 enhanced my frustration and my feelings of powerlessness while writing my thesis. It took me about 1.5 years to write a thesis. It was about the empirical turn in the bioethics. So it was very theoretical and it was very lonesome. And I believe maybe for the outside world, it seems like I conquered my obstacle by handing in a thesis that was good enough that I could graduate. But I don't feel proud of it. I'm not proud of that thesis. I don't feel like I conquered something. I feel more like I sold my soul to the devil, because writing that many pages, thinking about that for more than 1.5 years really took something from my spirit and something from me physically also. But against better intuition, I wanted to study more, and I started the master in gender and diversity, which is a master that is organized by all the Dutch universities in Belgium. And to be honest, I think I was, and I'm still not fully recovered from my first thesis. And for the new master, I needed to write daily. And even though I read and I wrote almost daily about equality and inclusion and diversity, the only thing they wanted of me was a written text. And I was starting not only to feel, I was not only feeling stressed, but I was also very frustrated by the fact that I felt so excluded in a domain that pretends to be inclusive and diversity friendly, while I still was being separated from my other students, fellow students. And then I found out that our master thesis in the gender and diversity studies didn't have any oral defense. And I was yet again only going to be judged based on my writing, meaning for me that half of my thoughts and idea wouldn't make it to the final product. I instantly became sad and furious. So I decided to make that feeling the subject of my thesis, the experience of not being able to show my voice because they keep disabling me by forcing me to write. And I'm also planning to point out that this form of discrimination, this kind of disabling, also interacts with other forms of discriminations by using an intersectional lens. So I started to look at courses in the disability studies. That is how I met Professor Van Hove. And I asked him to guide me in producing a second thesis, because I knew that I couldn't be the only person anymore that thinks and cares about my disability in the university. Previous professors always were very indifferent when I came out of the closet with my disability. So making my writing disorder the subject is very refreshing for me and is an important part of getting over my first thesis experience. So previous semester, we started thinking and talking together and decided that I should be able to defend myself orally. We became even more determined and started to think about the idea of me being able to hand in a non-written thesis to eradicate that non-predictive distinction between disabled and non-able students. So we started talking to other people, we succeeded, and I may officially hand in a thesis in a form of a podcast. Professor Van Hove and me are very open and determined in our view that my facility, so handing in a non-written thesis, shouldn't be an exception, but a part of the universal design of higher education. Every student should be able to hand in a non-written thesis. Again, to eradicate that non-productive distinction between that abled and non-abled student. And my thesis itself, it's still in full construction. I volunteer at Overkop. That's why I have to leave later on. And that's some sort of organization that provides social support to young people up until the age of 25. And some of the young people will join me in a workshop for teachers about neurodiversity and ableism in school. And I plan to ask the young people to join me in my podcast and talk about their experience with ableism, the workshop itself, and universal education. This way, I want to show how we can eradicate that distinction by coming up with practical solutions, such as being able to hand in a non-written thesis. I want to show how empowered students like myself, like the young people at Overkop, are a vital part in constructing universal education. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to my non-written story. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Amber.
And then one evening in January, a very dark, cold evening, Amber was bringing this story to her colleagues, connected to all kinds of theoretical works she could connect with.
I was just wondering, before you go on, Geert, whether it would be possible before you leave, and I'm not sure when you're leaving, Amber, but you know, for the audience to maybe engage a little bit with you while you're here, because it would be such a pity for you to leave and not to, for people not to have the opportunity to engage with you. Would you be open to that?
I can, it's volunteering. They know I have to do something. If I send a text them a bit later, they're just happy if I come back past an hour just to say hi. So that's okay. I think they will be very happy if I talk about the good work we're doing together. I think that's also a very important part of me volunteering there. So of course I will stay as long as the questions, if they're important questions, of course.
Great, thank you so much.
And I will be short so that there is time left to ask questions. But if some of the attendees already have questions at the moment, I see that there is a raised hand. I think perhaps somebody already wants to ask a question.
I think so. I think it's Denise. Feel free to post it in chat, or we can promote you, Denise, if you want to ask a question, if you're okay with accepting that promotion.
Yeah, I've promoted you to panelist, Denise.
think you can unmute now if you want to ask a question, Denise.
Thank you, Amber. I enjoyed that very much. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
I enjoyed that very much. I found it completely fascinating. I am interested in language and writing and speaking. And so I have found your presentation and your particular form of language use completely fascinating. I've never heard of it before. So it's really given me insight. I was very interested in your saying that you thought every candidate should be able to choose whether they want to hand in a written text or, for example, a spoken text, such as a podcast. That's what I heard you saying. Am I correct? But if I am correct in that, I want to ask you, do you think that every master's candidate should be able to have that choice, no matter their background or abilities or whatever?
Yes, and I do from a context in Belgium, and I think everybody should be able to do that, because in Belgium, other stereotypes play a very big role if you get diagnosed with dyslexia or not. So maybe people that are from migrant families and so on. So they are like people that just don't get diagnosed because there also is a gender difference also with dyslexia. So I think everybody should be able to do that. Then you don't need to be the people that have dyslexia and don't have it. Do we need that exactly to eradicate that distinction? I think that is what needs to be done for universal education, yes.
So am I understanding you correctly that every person who comes to do a master's, no matter what their background or whether they're diagnosed or they're considered normal or whatever, they should have the choice of whether they want to hand in a written dissertation or a spoken one, or presumably in some other form, like maybe they could make a film or something like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we need to get there maybe step by step, but I think that's the future I want to see. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question before Geert goes on? Maybe we'll get to it later if you'd like to go on, Geert.
Okay, thank you. And it's good to have already a question and a reaction on the story, because I think Amber was already introducing the kind of cultural context or cultural background we live in Belgium, with a very clear linear system that if you want to get a master degree, you need to write a master thesis. So there are some exceptions. I think some engineers are producing a product that is described. So there you have a combination. I think some filmmakers are making film or a drama and write a little project. And I think some architects are producing a product that is described. So there is already a little bit, but if you go to the standard way of studying in higher education, there is that thing called master thesis, written master thesis in our context. And I think a second element that is already interesting in the discussion between our distinguished attendee and Amber is the idea that when you open a little box, a lot of other boxes are there. And then you have the box of gender and you have the box of culture. I know Amber knows very well a taxi driver in her street who perhaps has dyslexia, but never was diagnosed because in Turkish families, there is not enough cultural capital to go to a school psychologist in certain families. So there is when you think about the solution, we have to be aware that we don't close doors for certain people at one hand. On the other hand, when you think about the solution, you see a lot of nice other boxes popping up and challenges being around. For me, the idea that we start with this personal story, this perspective of Amber, is really essential for disability studies while thinking about neuroatypicality, disability, whatever label or diagnosis you are using. For disability studies, lived experiences are the alpha and the omega of the idea of thinking of, working with. So we don't need an experimental setting. We don't need very clear and well distinguished trials. There is life, there are lived experiences, and I think this is a very important element to take with us. By saying we need lived experiences, there is already one element popping up, and it's the idea, do we use them? How do we use those lived experiences? So it would have been easy for me to position Amber as a case study, or as a case, or as a sample member, or what other words we use, or we can invite Amber to be with us and to talk for herself. And I think this is a very important second element. And for me, this kind of knowledge Amber has and this kind of insights Amber brings on the table are as important as the other insights that are there from all kind of experimental settings, groups that are set to each other, like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysorthographia, whatever science exercises we see. I think there is another entrance. That's the entrance of the lived experience and the personal story. For me, this is essential because I think this helped me, and now I'm very personal, to engage myself into a certain situation, to feel attracted by the questions Amber is putting on the table, and by bringing the life of Amber a little bit closer to my life, because I have a personal story too. So if I am the professor and I'm meeting Amber, the first thing I can do is saying there are students and there is a professor, or I can try to find the bridge. Why is this story bringing something on the table that is very important for me? Just as a background, I'm a grandson of a grandmother who was living and forced to live in a hospital, a mental health hospital, for 15 years. So through the story of my father, I learned a lot about life in institutions, about life with a diagnosis, about life away from your normal family, life away from your community. So for me, this is already a very important thing. And I'm also the brother-in-law of a man with Down syndrome who lives in an institution. So I'm also not only his brother-in-law, but also now and then a visitor. And then I have to wait in the visitor's room to see my family member. And this is something that is very important. So the personal story, the position we take, the perspective we take, the lived experience that are there are for me very important. Second element, if we think of and work with those very interesting lived experiences, for me it's good to go back to old teachers and old role models that were there in the beginning of my studies and who learned me a lot. And I give you two examples. When I started to study, the one and only Paulo Freire was very popular at that time. I was studying between 75 and 80 in my master's degree, so the 70s were full with Paulo Freire, who learned me that dialogue is not something you do in 10 minutes. Dialogue is a evolving, emergent process, very horizontal for Freire, listening to urgencies of other people, not saying, oh, but you are captured around under the umbrella of dyslexia. Don't worry, we have a solution for you. But what is the urgency? What are the choices Amber is bringing on the table? And also, Freire learned me that it is not easy to distance oneself from your own prejudices. So the idea of the not so smart student, the idea of the slow learning student, the idea of I was myself surrounded when I was in school by those prejudices of my teachers, but also I had perhaps those prejudices to other peers that were in my group. And I think Freire really learns me what respect is, while listening to urgencies and thinking about prejudices. That's one element in going from a personal story, thinking back, who were the ones who helped me to understand the story of Amber. Second teacher, very important for me, is Rinaldi. Carlina Rinaldi is a pedagogue who was very revolutionary in the 70s and 80s in Italy, in Reggio Emilia. And she was always working around listening. How can we listen to the story of Amber? We can try to become someone who knows something about hospitality. How can I invite Amber in my course? How can I try to make my course as safe as possible for a student as Amber is entering the room? And how do I take perspective of Amber? Can I get a little bit closer to the perspective of a 24, 5, 6 year old, 23-year-old young woman? I'm old, I'm gray, I'm not a woman, but how can I come closer? Rinaldi says listening is about getting as close as possible to the perspective of the other. And do we see the other as a stranger or not? Do we see Amber as a disabled student? She said, I was taught to talk about my disability. My teachers in secondary school were saying to me, go to the university, go to university college and say that you have dysorthographia, then they can help you, otherwise they don't help you. The moment students are doing this kind of disclosure, for a lot of them, they become very nervous because they think now this group of teachers will think that I'm stupid, that I'm other, that I'm a stranger. Rinaldi says, in each meeting, in each encounter, we have to become a kind of student in the situation. Also, the professor becomes the student who has to think, how do I dance together with the other? How do we learn to know each other? So, starting from a very personal story, lived experiences, my old teachers really helped me, and they are helping me every day in that lifelong learning trajectory to work with students who say, who disclose, who don't disclose, but are there in front of you in a group. Third thing, Freire and Rinaldi were pedagogues, but they were also very political. You could hear Amber saying, I am bringing my story on the table, not for me, but for me and the other students. Rinaldi was not working with little children in Reggio Emilia because some older and rich families could bring their children to the preschool services. She was working also for children from poor families in Reggio Emilia. Freire was not working with his language and teaching system for all students. He was going to the farmers who were called analphabetic, or I don't know what word you are using in English, but they could not read, they could not use language as they were presumed to be. So the idea that you use a personal story and that you go back to certain backgrounds in theory and in insights brings us to the political engagement that is necessary, and that brings us in a kind of close encounter with the idea the personal can become political. So the idea that Amber is going to the exam board of her faculty, asking the chairman to have a meeting, asking the secretary to organize that meeting, having that professor around the table with us, bringing that idea of podcasting on the table, sending that professor away to the board, going there for a yes or a no. These little steps, these little actions are bringing together a kind of energy. I think Deleuze and Guattari would be very interested in the energy source that pops up when Amber is bringing that question on the table. And there is a trajectory between the personal and the political. It's not Amber, it's not the Faculty of Arts and Moral Sciences. It's Ghent University. It's the peer group of Amber. It's the student board. It's the professor group who are involved in that process. And I think this is interesting to see and to link also to the colleagues that were talking in former webinars of this series. Remember Leni and Elizabeth and Leni talking about relationships and ethics, and the idea that you have to exercise in a kind of radical relationality to move a little bit in a certain direction. That's one example. And I think that it's also very clear that when we remember our colleague who was coming from the history of mad people and the group of people who called themselves mad, we see that Amber is carrying in her backpack a part of the history we share and we don't share with people who are different. So I think this is very interesting to take with us. Now, in the story of Amber, there are some very interesting little elements, and I will only go for 4. 1, does an objective diagnosis exist? That's a very interesting question. Amber is talking about tens, hundreds, thousands of tests she has to take to make sure we are able to understand that she has dysorthographia. And then she enters the room and people say, in this place, it does not exist. You are, no. All those doctors, all those psychiatrists, all those speech therapists, all those whatever tests, wizards are wrong. It does not exist. So this is very interesting. The moment we think we can capture a problem, a diagnosis, and you bring that with you, and you think now I will get a yes, or they will help me. They say we will help you, but we will help you, and that's the second thing. And Marieke, I think, is in the audience. Marieke is the master of machine thinking of Deleuze and Guattari, and I think the university is handling the problem and the question of Amber as a machine who is only able to think in linear solutions. If you have dyslexia, we will give you 10% more time to finish your written exam. If you have dyslexia, you can use a program on your computer that reads for you. But if you have dysorthographia and you are kept under the umbrella of dyslexia, this stupid machine is not able to step out and to make sure that you get the things that would help you. That's the second thing. The third thing is, I was so happy that Amber brought on the table, I am every day Every moment I'm trying to define myself. I'm trying to position myself as a woman, as a young person living in Belgium, as a student in a COVID pandemic, as a student with dysorthographia. And university as a machine only runs around saying, but it's dyslexia, you know, don't worry, we have facilities for you. Don't worry, it's there. So that's interesting to see. And it's interesting to listen. That's the fourth thing, that if we think about conquering obstacles and you end up by solding your soul to the devil, as Amber is defining it, we think we helped Amber, and I think we didn't do anything. We asked her to relive, to reorganize, to re-envision the same stress she knows already very well from the former periods of writing a master thesis. So there is a personal story. There are some teachers around who can help us to think about dialogue and listening. This can become a political engagement. There is a trajectory between the personal and the political. And while we are going that way, there are some very interesting elements in the story of Amber who are showing us that the university, that higher education as a machine, is what Tom Skritic was saying, a bureaucracy and not an adhocracy. He always says it would be nice to think in an adhocracy and to solve a problem when somebody enters the room, and to learn together and to think together and to work together and to make an environment that is interesting for everybody. And this last element, and then I will stop, brings me to the book that Amber was using for her presentation, the book of Timothy Dolmach, who says disability has always been an object of study in higher education. At the same time, people with disabilities are not welcome in that same institution. That's a very important historical element we should have in the back of our brain to understand what is happening. He also says, then we started to work around physical access, and we made ramps, and we made this, and we made that, and we said, now we live the idea of human rights. So we solved the problem, been there, done that. And then people showed up who were not using wheelchairs. Then people showed up who were not deaf and didn't need a translator. Then people showed up who were not disclosing but needed something. And there was a big problem. So the idea that disability and its place in higher education has to do with power differences and with diversity and power differences is a very interesting step we see that is taken in the book of Dolmach, going from not welcome to welcome because of access, technical access elements, becoming an element of discussion, becoming an element of negotiation, becoming an element of power and discussion. And then you see that bureaucracy, adhocracy, relationality becomes something very interesting. I don't know how it is in your countries, but in Belgium at the moment, last week, we are in the middle of the storm of abuse of students by professors. So a lot of female students, and especially it started with PhD students, then also master and bachelor students came on the forefront, are talking about the Me Too movement within institutions of higher education. And there you can see that there is an enormous distance between the group of professors and the group of students. We don't understand each other. So how could we listen to the stories of female students as professors? How does a machine of a university as a machine offers solutions to students who are bringing on the forefront that they were asked to have sexual intercourse with professors, and then they would get better marks, or they would get the questions of the exam, or they would be taken to the best conference for their CV as a PhD student. So that for me, this is incredible that we see that same scenario playing at the same time for people with disabilities, for people with diverse cultural backgrounds, for people with gender discussion, sexual abuse. So I'm really, it's a wrong word. I don't want to use it as such, but it's almost, you get fascinated by the stubbornness of a machine. You get fascinated by the stupidity of a machine that is not able to say, wait, what was your question? Can we listen to you? Wait, are we really listening to your urgencies? Wait, are we really giving respect to your ideas, your solutions, your questions, your dreams? So for me, this is incredible to see how the radical relationality where Leni and Elizabeth were fighting for within their presentation in this series is so important in all these questions. And then the last element is the idea of finding solutions. I don't know how you go to sleep at night. Do you look in the mirror every night saying to yourself, I had a list, a to-do list for today, and I could do 3 things I never was preparing, but they were there today, and there were 10 things I didn't do, and there was 1 thing I'm proud of. And I don't know how people survive and how people work, but I think in such a linear machine, people are forced to prepare themselves, to present themselves as people who show up with solutions. And if we don't take care, we are trapped in that because everybody wants to help. At the same time, every solution is now and then very poisoned because it brings us back to ideas about what is normal in an environment. They bring us back to ideas about norms and values, and it's so easy to be there as a technical managerial solution giver. It's so easy. Oh, dyslexia, been there, done that. Don't talk about dysorthographia. We are there for the deaf students. We are there for the students with autism. We have a silent room in our faculty. We have a silent room. Nobody knows where the silent room is. I got yesterday 3 messages of students who were asking for the silent room. And then we can say, you can find it on internet, you know, you can, there is a path on internet. Do they have internet? Do they know how to find it on internet? So the idea of the technical managerial way of organizing itself. And these are elements that Timothy Dolmage is playing with in his book, making sure that we think about what Amber is claiming, more universal design, more universality of higher education and studying in higher education. And I think this was my little extra for this being the sidekick of Amber today.
Thanks, Geert. That was so nice to augment actually what Amber was saying. And I really do identify with your chosen teachers, I must say. What I've heard about Rinaldi, I'm very interested in the work that she's done in the Reggio Emilia, especially the work on listening. I think we will open it up just now, but I just wanted to ask Amber whether she sees now her podcast as a form of activism, and you know, whether other people could perhaps make use of that, and how she's managed to integrate the book, which I think is going even beyond disableism and ableism. It's talking about how inaccessible actually the university is to most people, and how it's set out to be that way, not to give people access. So I just wondered if you had any ideas about that.
What was your quick question about podcast exactly again? Sorry.
Well, whether are you doing it on your experiences, and will other people be able to use that as a form of, to help them in their own activism? Because I think it's quite powerful coming from the student themselves to be able to change things like assessment practices in the university. It's very powerful if students are going to contest these sorts of things, because I think that is very difficult for students to do, to change assessment practices, which are hugely powerful, I think, in keeping people out.
I really hope my podcast has an activist side. I think every paper, everything in gender studies and disability studies and diversity studies should be somewhat activist. It is always political. And that's, I had a discussion with the facilities administration about this. It was, I hope that people, even though if they never have studied disability studies or something like that, or have an academic background, that they can hear my podcast and think, maybe recognize themselves, or at least think with us, with me and the young people, seeing, recognizing themselves, seeing solutions for themselves, starting to see that things can change, that the setting of the university, but schools in general, they're changeable. We can change them. So and then but at the university, the thesis, you have to write on a certain academic level. You have to use certain word, like ableism is very hard to use here in the Dutch region, because it's not really, it doesn't have a good translation. So you have to talk a bit about what is ableism in the English context, just to make sure that the young people or my parents who also have dyslexia understand that. And it's I think one of my main issues that I see for myself is making it academic enough in thinking level, but very accessible in language. And so I was talking about that with the facility administration, and I say to her, so yeah, I think maybe I'm at risk of losing all my points on language, because I wanted to make it that simple, that you guys might think that I'm not able to use very strong words, but I can, but I don't want to. And she said to me then, that's a very good critique. Yeah, I told her it's so weird that most students don't get points on being able to, being very accessible to other people, explaining something in very simple words. It doesn't get any credit or value in the master. And that's so weird to me, because I think you just understand something very good if you can explain it very simple. And that's not the case right now. You have to explain it very hard. And she told me, yeah, that's a good critique. And that was it. That was about it. I was like, yeah, but let's do something about that then. For me, there are people that maybe explain them better in very difficult words and hard words, and that can work for them, but it shouldn't be the standard or the go-to, if you will. So yeah, I hope very much it will be something activist. I hope maybe in the future I can also do a podcast with teachers, because teachers also have experience. I have friends who are autistic and are teachers. Their story is equally important as those of the students. So I really hope that, and for my life further, I can do something with this more for the Belgium and the Dutch education. Yeah, thank you.
So will your podcast be accessible to people? I mean, where will it be housed?
I think,
where is it housed, or have you done it already?
No. So first step now is, First, I wanted to use an exam moment to show my workshop my input for the workshop to Professor Van Hove and some fellow students to make sure they thought it was somewhat correct, so I could be really sure of myself. Now it's the part that the people of Overkop who are joining, so I'm asking left and there, right, are you interested? I know you talk about these things sometimes. And it's now time that they are looking at what I already have and what they want to put in. Do they want to tell them a story of 10 minutes long, or do they just want to talk to the teachers afterwards, or some teams? So now it's the period that we try to make something together. I have my input, I have the basics. Then we're going to give the workshop in May, I think. After that, it's going to be very, I think it's my plan to do the podcast very shortly after that, because then it's recent, not the day after, but not like 4 weeks after that. And I think, or it will be available through Ghent, because they always publish master theses, so I think they need to do that as well. Or it will be able to find it through the channel of Overkop. They also do podcasts recently, so they also have like a channel for that, a Spotify channel, I think. But those are like logistic and practical things that we'll see along the way.
And Overkop, Vivienne, is a youth organization that has houses in different cities in Belgium where youngsters can pop in. They can jump in, they can stay there a bit, they can work on their schoolwork, or they can follow a meeting, they can meet peers. And due to the fact that Amber works there as a volunteer, she can invite youngsters of Overkophuizen to give extra voices
Nice.
in the podcast, and they are very good in PR. They are really everywhere. So everybody knows that in this city and that city there is an Overkophuis, so the house itself, but they also have a strong network online. They have also, and I think they have all the technical advice for Amber to put those podcasts online for young people. And it will be the voice of young people. It's not Amber alone, but Amber together with the youngsters. So this will be nice, I think.
I remember when we came to Ghent, you showed one of those Overkop. I remember that.
Your memory is so good. Yeah.
Maybe we should, I see there is a question in the Q&A, so I'd like to hand over to Nikki and Candice and to open it up to everyone.
Yeah, that would be great. So yeah, we do have one question that's been typed in our Q&A button. So again, those who are here joining us, if you want to post a question there, Nikki and myself can make sure to voice that. Also, I think Nikki, Viv, we can also push the button that gives all of our attendees the option of turning on their video and or audio. So maybe Nikki, if you want to start giving people that option, they can join and also have the option to voice their question themselves. And so while that's happening, I'll go ahead and read out our first question, and then we can begin to engage in some dialogue together. So the first question states that I'm respecting your being a rebel who undertake the discussions with the university to request movements in their standardized thinking. How do you experience this spending time in lobbying, not being able to spend your time at that moment in your personal interest? How do you stay encouraged to pitch these holes in higher education system? So that's probably directly to Amber, but also Geert might also have something to add to that as well. Amber?
Well, I think mostly does not feel like a choice. It feels like something I have to do, and it's the thought that I do it for the people that come after me. That the person like 10 years from now doesn't have to have the feelings that I had. That is actually the thing that gives me the most energy to do something. I couldn't imagine writing another thesis, and I have to if I want to graduate. So I think the hardest part is when sometimes you get an email or a little something small that shows that you actually are working something against something. When I talk to Professor Van Hove and some other people, it doesn't feel like that. Then we are working together. But it's like the small instant moments that sometimes you get the push from you work against something and not with you. Those are like the hard moments. But if you have a good like support system socially and such, and you know that what you're doing is actually something good and they should be grateful for you doing it, then that helps, that feeling of something you get, that you do it for other people. If I would do it for myself, I would have stopped by now, because I would say, yeah, I'm just going to do something nice then. Take a new hobby, play The Sims a bit more, I don't know. But it helps that I've the thought that people maybe could be able to hand in a non-written thesis without taking that thousands of steps, then I take gladly those steps.
And is this the moment, Amber, to tell a little bit about your family as a background?
Well, yes. Well, but for me, it's just very natural. But dyslexia has a main characteristic that's something that all your family has, because that's I think very logical, because it's your brain. It should be nature nurture wise. So my whole my grandmother has dyslexia, my brother has it, and my parents have it. And you can see through the generation how much it has been different for us. Like my grandmother was like 30, 40 years ago, was not in a city, so that difference also. And she was from a lower social class than I was at the start, so she was just stupid, and she was never able to go learn exactly what she wants. She wanted to become a nurse, and she is like 65. I hope she doesn't watch this and I say that she's older. But she sometimes she tells me that, but I'm stupid, I think stupid. And she's not stupid. I tell her, you're not stupid. You say a lot of things that my professors say, and you say it in your own way, with your own insights, and you didn't need to have like thousands of texts. You didn't need to read thousands of texts to see the world how they see it. You're smart. But she will never be able, I think, to accept that, because her whole life she felt stupid due to the position she was in. Then you see my mother, who also has a dyslexia. She is the child of my grandmother, but was able to get further in school. Also, she's a smart woman, but she doesn't like to write. So she was, she did higher education, and it's very nice to see. It was the first year for me. I never was very, how do you say it? I never minded telling people I was dyslexic. I wasn't scared of being stigmatized, because I am a very okay talker in Dutch. I don't know if how I come over in English, but in Dutch I'm pretty okay. And it was the first year that I realized at Christmas, when we were telling stories about how bad school was for us and how math teachers got at us. It was the first year this year that I realized the fact that we were telling those stories so good, and that was so good conversation, that also was our dyslexia. And by telling that to my mother, to my grandmother, by telling them, well, which people also have dyslexia, which are a lot of people that created our modern world had some sort of dyslexia. And this year, my mother, for the first time, was proud of herself, and of me and my brother for having dyslexia. For the first time in like 23 years for me, it wasn't a problem, it was something good. And my grandmother also felt, when I was telling that to her, that there was a story about it that was being told that otherwise never was being told, namely the discrimination of not being a good writer. But for the first time this year, everybody realized that the fact that we were a sort of dyslexic family also made us a very good family in talking to others and each other. So that's a bit the story of my family, I suppose.
So being a rebel is not only being a rebel, but it's also being the daughter of a rebel, the granddaughter of a rebel, and the sister of a rebel. So I think it's important to understand, if you listen to stories of people, to understand in what contexts people are growing up, what families are sharing, and what the talents of certain families are. I can imagine that if all those people are around the table eating together, that there is a lot of talking in your house, while in other families people will read out written messages to each other, and I don't think this is the case in your family. So I think it's good to learn how in the question the word rebel is also linked to the generations of women that are together in this family of Amber, bringing and reliving the story of different generations with the same talents, with the same questions, with the same elements that are coming back and back. But thank you for your family story. I know you like to tell that story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for, yeah, I love hearing the context and the supports and the people that you're surrounded with and how that shapes who you are and how you're navigating higher education. And we have a handful of people who did choose to move into kind of the video audio. So if there's somebody who wants to unmute, or if you want to use the raise hand function, we're happy, to call on you. I'm not sure if we'll get all the videos working, but I think audio for sure is an option right now. So are there any other questions from people that are here? I see a hand. Nikki, do you want to start us off with a question?
Sure, thanks, Candace, and thank you, Amber. And listening to you today, Amber, I'm struck by how much work needs to be done with teachers. And I know you mentioned having a workshop with teachers, but certainly looking at thinking of the institution where I work in Cape Town, there's so much learning and unlearning that teachers will have to do. And I think that's where Geert's talking about listening comes into it, because so much, when I started my job a few years ago, I did a teaching development program course, and there was a lot of merit in it, but it was not at all geared towards, well, in part it was, but towards different ways of doing assessments, for example, the dreaded assessment word. And also a big issue, kind of more broadly in our institution, is the issue of access and what happens by allowing students or giving students access and then not actually being able to meet their needs is a very complex, and common problem in our institution. I don't think there was a question in that, sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe there was.
I think it's not only your institution, it's certainly UWC where I work. I mean, in South Africa, one is just very conscious of those sorts of access issues. And we had a man at UWC, I don't know if you ever met him, Geert, his name was Wally Morrow. And he used to say that it's all very well to give students physical access to the university. He spoke about epistemological access. And that was about 20 to 30 years ago. And that's why they started the Academic Development Center at UWC. But I think at UWC, the disabilities unit's always been a tiny little thing, which is, only, as you say, dealt with very specific issues. And if there's anything different from those issues, then nothing is actually made available. So, I mean, those very rigid ways of dealing with things are also things that have to be objected to. And the having to do test after test and prove yourself is also quite a debilitating process, I think. And you start to think of yourself in a particular way when you're having to do all these tests all the time.
In the name of human rights, we bring students to a process of proof that you are not cheating. That's it's like a paranoid. It's typical for a linear machine. A linear machine is also a bit of a paranoid machine. who is everything that doesn't fit between A and B can be, it's difficult to believe that there is something between. Sorry. So a lot of the students know that story from their secondary school in Belgium, even already in primary school. And they have to relive that, although they have the paperwork, most of them, or you should be a member of a poorer family who doesn't have access to the healthcare system, but most of our students have, they can prove, but then the machine says does not exist, or we give you support that does not fit. So there is a very paranoid element in this whole story.
Probably also one has to prove it time and time again. You know, it's not enough just to do it once. You've got to keep renewing that you are eligible. Is that correct?
I like to add, this is actually a story of a friend of mine. Since Corona, since COVID-19, the university has upped their game in giving students money for going to psychiatrists and all of that, because they started to acknowledge that there's a lot of mental health problems with the students. I think almost all of my friends who are studying are going to some sort of therapy now, for all kind of reason, but also because they study. And one friend of mine, so it's a very tough process to get money from Ghent. Other schools in Ghent, like Artevelde and such, are very much easier, but the University of Ghent is very hard. And she succeeded in it. She gets money, but what she needs to do, every time she goes to her therapist, she needs to write it down. So she needs to write down what they're talking about, what their struggles are. That's so personal, and she needs to send it. Yeah, they need to keep track of it. The reason it's okay, you can have money, but we need to go to see what that money is spending on. How are you feeling? But those problems are so personal, and the idea that you have to write about it, it would be my personal problem that I would write about it. But the idea that you have to explain yourself in that way to the university, who in the first instant doesn't take enough care of us, what is partly why we have to go to therapy. So it's she told me that like 2 weeks ago, and I was startled. I couldn't believe that the university asked her of that. To disclose herself like that time and time again, just to get the money. Yeah.
What I found interesting in that book was sort of likening the university to, you know, these institutions or asylums. You know, the university is supposed to be this place where there's so-called freedom and that sort of thing. And they sort of distance themselves from the asylums, and they even spoke about the university being built, you know, on the place where there was an asylum. So it's quite interesting to think about universities in that way.
In New York, you have Willowbrook, where a big mental hospital was in the 60s. State hospital that is closed, and now there is a university using the buildings. And I think this is
Toronto, the University of Toronto, they said, yeah.
It's very interesting to go back to Goffman and to think what were the characteristics Goffman was describing about an asylum, and how do we see that linear paranoid machine as a parallel or as a little sister of the asylum we were fighting against. Yeah.
Nikki?
Amber, I have a question, and this time it is a question, and I don't quite know how to ask it. In that, I'm wondering. So what does knowledge look like for you? Actually look like? In other words, I'm a maker and I can make things, and I think those are forms of knowledge. And writing is also another form. It's not in, I can put it out there, I can edit it, I can change colors, I can scribble, whatever. So for you, what form, physical form, does your thinking, how does it manifest other than your voice?
I think
the words in your voice.
Well, the big problem for me for that is my voice is my best tool. My least tool is my writing. And the problem at university is it's focused so much on that writing. I don't have the energy to go look for somewhere else to give an outing on that. Sometimes I draw a little, but that doesn't reflect my ideas and such. So talking, and you don't have a lot of opportunities to talk like we're doing right here. You don't get those opportunities normally. So that's for me why the master thesis was so frustrating to me. It was I was never giving the opportunity to manifest all the ideas that I have, because every time I write the half of what I think of my critical reflection, I can't write them down. I can't say them. I know that's very hard to understand. I don't understand it myself. I can say them. I can't write them. That's simple, and I can't write them. Especially in academic language, which is also, it's not just writing, it's academically writing, which is a lot more narrower. You have to constantly refer to people. There's so much rules, so much details. So it's not normal writing that goes. It's a bit of spelling errors, but my thoughts get on the paper. But it's the specifically of academic writing. And the strategy that is focused on that so much that other talents just don't get developed as much. You have to put in that extra personal time. And for me, all my extra time was in all the papers that I needed to write, because every time I asked the student administration, you can, but also other universities, couldn't I have just more time or more flexible deadlines for my writing and such? And he always says no, because you can make more time for a paper. Even if I told them, okay, I understand that, but all my classes ask for a paper. I don't have an infinite amount of time, but that is what I ask of you. So I think the most tragedy of it all is that I wasted a lot of time compensating and still not being in the same level as all the others that had a lot less work in it. And all that time that I put into that, I hadn't had the chance to develop something that I actually like and actually good at. Like I like talking and such, but I didn't really rehearse it that much at university. We're not trained for this. So that's just, I think that's maybe the big strategy of all.
Nikki, I see the time is 17:56 here. I don't know about other people. And I just wanted to say that Candice had said that she would have to leave early. So she just sort of disappeared. Denise also, the person who spoke to you first, Amber, she also said that she had to leave early just to give some explanation. But I just wondered if you wanted to just wrap up, Nikki.
Sure. And what a pity. I wish we could carry on with this conversation. But thank you very much, Amber and Geert. And for all the attendees for joining us today. And as we stated before, the webinar is recorded and we'll post information on the webinar series webpage on how to access the recording on YouTube. I've also put into the link when our next webinar in the chat, our next webinar, which will be on the 17th of March with Tanya Tichovsky, same time, and the link is there, but we will be contacting people via email with the correct Zoom link, I promise. Otherwise, thanks everybody. It went too quickly.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thanks for staying on, Amber. It was so nice that you were here and you could answer questions in that.
And enjoy Overkophuis tonight.
I do. I will. Thank you so much for having me. For me, this was a wonderful experience of just being able to talk to you. It's great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.